What was your paranormal experience? Story 1. My father died less than 6 months after my daughter was born. She was not a good sleeper for her first year or so. She was waking up screaming and crying at all hours of the night. My wife and I would trade times getting up to soothe her. One evening not too long after my father passed, I dreamed that my daughter was screaming in her bedroom. In the dream, I got up and went to her room, but before I got there my dad came out of the room and just said, "She'll be okay," and kept walking away and the crying stopped. I shot up and saw the baby monitor screen was on. It was on sound activated mode, so the screen only comes on when a sound it's over 60 decibels and goes off after 3 minutes of quiet. I get up and check and she's fine and sleeping. A little shaken, it took me a bit to get back to sleep. I tell my wife about the dream in the morning. She told me she heard her crying, but thought I'd gotten up to calm her. Still, a vivid memory in my mind nearly 3 years later, seeing my younger looking dad coming out of her room. Story number 2. I'll add my own here. I once was laying in my bed with my dog at the foot of it. I was on the cusp of sleep when suddenly my dog's pop her head up and locks onto something in the middle of my room. Her head then slowly turns and follows something I can't see. Her head stops again and my backpack gets knocked over, after having been in the same spot for hours. Then all of a sudden a loud bang on my bedroom window. I was on the second floor of the house. I ran out of that room so quickly without daring to look at that window. Story number 3. Not mine, but one I think of a lot. I was at work one night and my mom was visiting my newborn son and wife. I get home and my mom tells me she heard my dad talking to my son. My dad died 8 years prior, but she swears up and down it was his voice. My wife heard it too but never met my dad, so she couldn't say much about it. Just that it was a man's voice. Then it happened again when my daughter was born. I really want to believe my dad is watching the kids grow up, but I'll never know. Story number 4. My husband and I stayed at a super old hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico. At the time I did not really believe in paranormal things or ghosts, mainly because nothing had ever happened to me. The old room we were staying in had this decorative wooden chair that had a slanted seat. I took note of the slant, because I wound up putting my computer bag on this chair and felt comfortable doing so. I'm super careful with my electronics, and the slanted seat made it so my bag slid all the way back into the back of the chair so it couldn't fall. I also hung a nice new dress on the back of the chair. We went out for sightseeing and when we came back, my dress was on the floor near the chair. I wondered if housekeeping had touched it, even though we had do not disturb on our door all day and the room had not been serviced. Oh well, we ordered in some dinner and went to bed. My husband and I were laying in bed in the dark talking, almost falling asleep, when suddenly we hear a super loud slam. It was so loud, we shot awake and turned on the light. There on the other side of the room, a good 10 or 15 feet from the chair, was my computer bag. It was like someone had lifted it and threw it down. There's no way it just fell off the chair that far away, and the chair seat was slanted backwards toward the wall. It would be hard for anything to just fall off it, especially forward and 15 feet away. And it was a slam to the ground. I was so terrified, but my husband just shrugged like, "Huh, guess this place is haunted like a lot of places in Santa Fe. Guess the ghost doesn't like stuff on its chair." I demanded we sleep with a light on. I didn't even have the courage to check if my computer was okay until the next day. The next morning my husband asked the front desk if the hotel was known to be haunted, and the guy just laughed and said, "Oh what, did you see the little girl?" This blew up, but it's 100% a true story and literally is the only paranormal thing that's ever happened to me. My computer was just fine, thank goodness. It had a nice case on it, but I was freaking out when I did finally go to open it. The hotel was the Hotel St. Francis, and I found a picture online of one of the chairs on a random Yelp review here. I guess a few of their standard rooms all have this chair, so this probably isn't the chair, and also I remember my chair having a solid back with no hole / connected to the seat, so mine may have been slightly different. Still gives me the creeps when I look at it. Story number 5. I was visiting family and staying in a hotel with my boyfriend, husband now. The first night there we went to bed and I woke up in the middle of the night facing the window. I noticed there was a dark shadow in the corner of the room that looked human-shaped. After staring a while I realized it must have been a floor lamp since that corner was kind of bare and that's the logical choice. I rolled over and went back to bed. The following morning I remembered this and turned to look into the corner where the lamp was and there isn't a floor lamp there. The corner is bare. I mentioned it to my boyfriend and he went white. He told me that he woke up in the middle of the night because he felt like he was being watched and had to get up out of bed to go to the bathroom. I vaguely remember him getting up, to try and shake the feeling. It still sticks with me in dark rooms. Story number 6. I don't know if this qualifies as paranormal per se, but I was home alone one weekend and decided to make myself scrambled eggs for breakfast. Took a full carton out of the fridge. Grabbed an egg, and cracked it. Went to grab a second egg, only to notice the carton was full. Again. I just stood there and stared at the full carton for a few seconds, expecting one to disappear maybe? I don't know, then I just threw them all out. Wasn't gonna mess around with phantom eggs. There is probably a rational explanation, but I know what I saw. Story number 7. Back when I lived in my very first apartment, I would hear what sounded like a little child calling for their parent. Now at first I thought it was genuinely some kid who was lost because the complex was big enough for a kid to wander off from their parents. But the voice seemed to always be right next to me. It wasn't until I moved out that I found out a little girl was killed by her abusive father in the 80s. Story number 8. Oh my goodness, do I have something for this? I'm going to cheat a bit. This was not my experience but my dad's, and what he has experienced in his life regarding this is far more interesting than mine. So strap yourselves in, cause it's going to be a long one, and let me tell you about his old farmhouse, aka the spooky house. Now for context, my dad grew up on dairy farms with his parents, who worked for a guy who owned multiple farms. So they would hop around to different farms and manage them, so to speak. Also, we live in Australia. Anyway, while my dad was in his late teens to early 20s, they lived in this house that eventually became known as the spooky house to him and his parents, and this what they experienced while living there. The house was known to have a very foreboding feeling to it. Like something was always off and you couldn't put your finger on it. Floor was made out of old wood that had little notches in it, and Nan, Dad's mom, put little stoppers in them to fill the holes. A lot of the time they would wake up in the morning and find that all of the stoppers were pushed up, from underneath the house. Dad said they had these giant-ass hippie beads hanging in the doorways. So big and heavy that it would have to be a big gust of wind to move them. He lost count how many times he would get up early for work or such and find them swaying. Like someone walked through them, but when he checked the bedrooms, everyone was asleep. I remember Dad telling me that it slowly got worse over time. Like the house didn't want them there or something. At one point Nan contacted a psychic to see if they could make it better or calm it down. Well, the psychic wouldn't even get out of her car and come up the driveway. Absolutely refused to come inside the house. Nan was left flabbergasted and asked what she could do. The psychic told her to move house and drove off. Dad said not long after that these things would start stalking the house. To this day he has no idea what they were, and he doesn't really want to know. Nan would come out in the morning, find that the grass was pressed down or trampled around the house. Especially where the windows are. Her peg basket on the clothesline would be ripped to shreds and bits of it spread around. Dad said she would get the shits cause she had to keep buying new ones. Ha. It started to get more serious when Dad would be woken up by scratching at his window, on the outside. He was always too scared to look back at it, cause he knew whatever it was staring right back at him while scratching the window. They would check at morning to find that the paint had been scratched off the house at around human height and grass flattened. At one point while his dad was out working a few paddocks over, Nan came in and woke Dad up, and together they huddled in his bedroom, waiting for daylight as the thing stalked around the outside of the house. Speaking of, it stalked Dad once too. He was walking from the house to his dad, a few paddocks over to help with the cows. About 4 am-ish. It was a cold and there was frost on the grass. As Dad was walking he could hear a crunch coming behind him. So he stopped and it stopped too. Dad was like huh and started walking again, and so did it. Again Dad stopped and it stopped. Now starting to get freaked out, Dad's starting to pick up the pace and he stopped again. Only this time it didn't stop, but started to come right at Dad. The Dad bolted. Ran over 2 paddocks and cleared the fences. Didn't stop till he reached his dad's side. Whenever Dad's parents left for a couple of days and he had the place to himself, Dad would host massive parties with his friends. They had the run of the house and could sleep wherever they wanted. But all of them always end up huddling up in one room when they went to sleep. One time it was just Dad and his cousin over, they played a game of pool and drank. At one point around midnight, the both of them were sitting around and heavily drink. A dark figure appeared and said go to bed. Dad said he was piss drunk and thought why the hell not, and they went to bed. The next morning they woke up to find the game of pool that was left unfinished put away, and his cousin asked who that person was that was standing over their beds watching them sleeping. But Dad didn't remember that part. Anyway, there's more to that house that I can tell, but this is getting to be a very long post, haha, sorry about that. I will say though that Dad and his parents moved out and someone else eventually moved in. Not long after that, the house burned down. Dad didn't know what caused the fire, but he was sure happy about it.